Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Peter Lynch, a filmmaker whose work includes the documentaries Project Grizzly, Cyberman, and A Whale of a Tale, the hybrid film The Herd, and the new dramatic feature Birdland, a thriller starring Kathleen Munro, David Alpay, Stephen McHattie, and Melanie Scrofano. Peter picked The Conversation, Francis Ford Coppola's exquisite 1974 character study come conspiracy thriller, starring Gene Hackman as Harry Call, a master of surveillance technology who pulls off the greatest challenge of his career, remotely recording a conversation between two people in a very public place, and then finds himself unable to put it behind him. An elegantly messy drama that slowly builds into a white-knuckle, utterly of-the-moment thriller surrounding Hackman with a wonderful supporting cast that includes John Cazale, Alan Garfield, Frederick Forrest, Cindy Williams, Terry Garr, an unbilled Robert Duvall, and a baby-faced Harrison Ford. The Conversation is all the more remarkable for Coppola having knocked it out between Godfather movies. The first two. Oscar nominated for Best Picture, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Sound, it lost in all three categories. Not that it matters. You've seen it, right? Because if you haven't, you're really going to want to before you listen to this episode. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Well, The Conversation is a film which I can really relate to in terms of it being an author-driven film by an auteur director. And it's about a time that really interests me as well, that where there's the kind of paranoia of the Watergate, and there's a spiritual sort of crisis going on and cynicism that sort of a lot of the ideas of the film come out of. It's the idea of surveillance, and I just made a film where surveillance is an important part of the story, and so when I was making my film, it was something that I had a look at, and I just love the way it uses. It's kind of like Blow Up, Antonioni's Blow Up, but with sound, about sound, and that to me leaves a lot open to the imagination, and but I really love the fact that it's the way it bends genre, but it's freely not formulaic. It's something that's also reminds me that it's made somewhat like a documentary, in that I can tell that a lot was put into the editing, and there's a very free sort of structural explosion of the story that I think was really made in the edit, and the sound edit as well is so intricate to the storytelling, which I find of my interest.
Yeah, it is. I can't say it's my favorite Coppola film, but it's the one I always come back to more quickly. I guess because it has all of those amazing technical merits, but it doesn't reveal any of them. It hides them from the audience as long as possible.
Yeah.
It's an almost unconsciously cinematic movie as an experience. I mean, I remember seeing it, and your very first impulse is to lean forward, right? To watch that movie is to be drawn into it.
Yeah.
Before they introduce Hackman, before they introduce the world, that gorgeous opening shot that isn't about anything but is about everything, and filled with weird noises, and it's just so marvelously analog now too.
Well, it starts off in chaos and kind of ends in a kind of chaos, but the world something has been revealed along the way, and it keeps showing you, asks a certain question that you hear the two main characters in that chaos being, obfuscated by polyrhythms of drums and mimes following Harry Call, the central character, and you're wondering who's following who and who's looking at who, and you don't it's like the opening of Chinatown, where you're looking at an image staring you right in the face, and it's shown to you a few times, and as the story unfolds, more and more is revealed, and each time those same lines that are pretty well the same, there's slight variations on them, you're looking at a similar picture, and yet the story is slowly evolving, and the character moves from watching to becoming more involved in the story as it unfolds.
Yeah, and you can say that for the film as a whole too. The thing doesn't change, but our understanding of it does.
Exactly. Yeah,
and a lot of that has to do with the sort of classic noir structure that's imposed on it. I mean, it's a contemporary film. It makes no bones about that.
Yes,
but by using the perspective of an investigator who's brought in to solve a mystery or to capture something which then becomes a mystery, the themes of obsession and betrayal and all the other stuff, it's just a full-on, I mean, it might as well be Raymond Chandler,
Yes.
Except that it's working at a level of technological expertise that Chandler never had any patience for.
Well, it's interesting too that I think that Harry Caul is this guy he's a professional. He's a bug guy, you know, and that's his art form. And he's a misanthrope, doesn't really fit in. He's like Coppola talks about how he drew on Hermann Hesse's Steppenwolf as his character, this kind of loner kind of guy. And so he's this guy who's really doing it as a business. He says, I don't have anything to hide, or, you know, the only thing I have that's of any importance is my keys, you know. And there's these kind of illusions that he's someone who's not really involved in the actual story. Like, he doesn't really care what the material is, what the story is. He's more about the form. He's doing a job and he gets paid for it. But in this case, something starts to haunt him as he starts to decode it and unravel the sound and all the machinations around it. He starts to, you don't know to what extent he's fully understanding the material in front of him, to what is becoming like a representative of his own delusions, his own paranoia, and his own issues of guilt. And that comes out in his Catholicism and his puritanical response to one of the other buggers who, you know, says something says Jesus Christ, or his assistant says that, and it offends him. Right. And even to the end where he cracks open the Madonna image and there's nothing inside it, and that kind of the confession part, which is also the kind of proto, you know, surveillance in a way. He gets drawn into these pockets of perception that challenges his notion of what he's seeing, but also what his identity is coming unraveled, or sort of apart as he gets more involved. And I guess it's like Chinatown in that way. Like Jake, he's going in, at first he's doing it like it's a job, right? And then something happens that sticks in his craw that he can't live with anymore without getting personally involved. And I think the same thing happens to Harry Caul. Is there something he starts to perceive that this woman, it's sort of like he's found an intimacy with the image of the woman and the guy, and starts to think that they're about to be, you know, murdered by, you know, the disgruntled, the vengeful husband, evil corporate guy. And so he takes that on as a narrative, but the narrative is not necessarily as clear as what he first can unravel, you know. So it's what he prefers to believe as he's in that point in the juncture of the story.
Yeah. I keep coming back to the noir thing, partially because, as I was explaining earlier, I foolishly thought today we were going to be doing the line.
Right.
Well, I've scheduled a bunch of episodes to the listener. I'm very sorry. I'm not usually this stupid. But I scheduled a bunch of stuff. I thought the conversation was tomorrow on the Long Goodbye today, so my head is still full of...
Well, we can... Yeah. I like the noir aspect.
But they line up. Yeah. That's the other thing.
They really do. Yeah.
There's that thing, that movement, and Chinatown's the other one, in the early 70s with the new American cinema.
Yeah.
Filmmakers hit a point where they knew their audience was familiar with the tropes of this genre, and they could just take it apart and put it together anywhere. And The Conversation is maybe the least noirish of them, because it's set in San Francisco and it's removed from everything in that way. It's not about detection, really. The mystery is solved ostensibly in the very first scene. The challenge is dealt with. Like, the conversation has been recorded. And so you end up looking at it backwards, almost like through a dark mirror, and Harry Caul hiding something that went wrong before, that he carries the stain of. Everybody else knows about it, but we never find out what it is. It's kind of the same thing as Chinatown's device of whatever happened in Chinatown.
Yes.
Someone did the right thing, people got hurt or killed, and as a result, he's buried himself in this little box where he refuses to come out, won't engage with anyone emotionally, won't reveal anything about himself, is horrified to be seen. And yet, everything about the movie paints him as the knight, paints him as the good guy, paints him as someone who will do the right thing. Even the fact that he chooses, or that Coppola gave him that insane translucent raincoat.
Yes.
Where you literally can't hide anything.
Yes.
But you don't get wet. Like that he wears it like this imagined veil of protection.
Yes.
And I'm just stunned by how easily so much of this film just slots into the expected Sam Spade stuff, where the rot is the thing that hired him rather than the thing he's chasing.
Well, the interesting thing too, I think, about noir is people associate it with gumshoe or detectives and murder mysteries, but really they're kind of often psychological portraits.
Sure.
And they're portraits of usually a central character, but also of the time. They're like hold up a mirror to different sources of illumination of the paranoia of the time. And in this case, being kind of post-Watergate, being Vietnam is going on, it's post-Kennedy assassination. There's a kind of cynicism and a fear of corporations having control. Yep. Even the corporation you don't quite know what the name of the corporation is. You don't really know who's who. The director that he's supposed to be working for isn't there when he shows up the first time. Mm-hmm. But you see him slowly getting more personally involved from being this professional guy to becoming emotionally embroiled. And you see the things that he has of issues of that he's someone who photographs people or surveils people but can't stand to be photographed himself.
Right.
And that extends to the intimacy you see with women. Like he seems to be more comfortable looking at the image of the woman and the mystery of the unscrambling of the sound. He feels more intimate with that relationship to the characters than a woman trying to make out with him or seduce him or have intimacy relations with him. He seems more comfortable when it's in the realm of this distanced medium,
Yeah, or the projected medium, where he can assume whatever he wants rather than have to deal with, the what did they used to call it? The messy reality of other people's feelings.
Right.
Where as soon as any other variable is introduced, he shuts down.
Yes.
The thing with the bug in that little phone tap bug thing is so fascinating because it's so obvious to us and not to him.
I love what you said too about the analog. Like it comes at a time when analog was, you could see how mechanics of things work, like the reel to reels.
Yes. Yeah.
Or that the shotgun. I mean, I think I understand that he did a lot of research with what was the state of the art, but he also, I think, made up things that were probably almost like science fiction. But they really something that the medium probably grew into probably shortly after.
Yeah, it's weird to see stuff predicted that way.
But I like the fact that there's this, in the world now, it's more digital and hidden. And there, it's this analog system that you can see, you can almost visualize the sound of people moving around on the reel-to-reel. Mm-hmm. Like it's something feels very human, and the analog relationship to the world is completely shifted to indexing time digitally now. Yeah. So, and surveillance is ubiquitous. Like with my film Cyberman, you could still, the documentary where there's Professor Mann would strap cameras on himself, you could still see a grainy kind of image of what he was filming, right? But now the surveillance is our existence. It's what's our presence, our footprint, our digital footprint when we use our cell phone, when we use our credit card, when we drive through a light, when we go into a bank, it's just, we are completely immersed in it. Whereas there, it was still something you had to point to, like a filmmaker. Like he's a proto-filmmaker. There's something about the process that Harry is doing is very much the way a documentary filmmaker would observe a character's manner of operation, right? And start to try to make meaning out of that, the sound and the images. And he's editing it and trying to look for patterns and like this kind of thing. But for sure it is noirish. And what's interesting is, I think for an American film at that time, it really has that feeling of a kind of almost like a Polish art film. Like it's got that greenish kind of quality that you would see in the European cinema. And I think he was very influenced by European cinema at that time. And there's a freedom about like the form of noir. He plays it out, but it's like that Jean-Luc Godard quote, like everything has a beginning, middle, and end, but not necessarily in that order. Right. He's really much playing with structure and sound, and I love the expressionistic element of the sound. It reminds me of Hitchcock's The Birds, where he's created a sound. He's made sound, the sound of the bug world and the mystery of it. He's made it a character, and when you hear that sound going,
it's like a signature.
Exactly, and I think Hitchcock did that with the birds. He created that through electronic. If you really look at the birds, it's not realism. It's the sound of those birds is quite expressionistic, but you don't, when you're in the middle of it, it makes it more emotional. And the counterpoint to the soundtrack with that haunting sort of bluesy piano creates this oscillation between the cognitive dissonance between what he's trying to struggle with and make meaning of that seems impenetrable, and more his slow emotional involvement in this, or emotional unraveling.
Because the closer we get to Harry, the more we see how unstable he is.
Exactly.
And it's weird that I don't associate Coppola with psychological realism quite so much, because The Godfather and The Godfather 2, I mean, there are realist portraits.
Sure.
But they're so grandiose and they're so big.
And operatic.
Yeah, exactly. And by the time you got to the third one, the emotions are so high and so pitched. Yeah. And then right in the middle of the first two, he makes this. Yeah. And it's almost like a divertisement for him. He just wanted to do something else between giant machines. And it's probably the most astute thing, the most accurate, acute emotional state film he's ever realized.
Yeah. And with an unemotional character.
Exactly.
It's like the Harry Cole is his least emotional character on the surface, but there's something seems to be like there's something coming unhinged, like Taxi Driver in a way. You've got this Taxi Driver is more, you can see that he's more unstable on the surface, but that the tearing apart of the room at the end looking for the bugs seems almost as apocalyptic as the end of Taxi Driver or something.
But it's emotionally self-directed destruction. Yeah. He's ruining his environment rather than lashing out.
Exactly. And the saxophone, I guess, is his little connection to, well, it has a connection to the noir, I think.
Yeah.
But it also has a connection to the soul and the individual, like his spirit within the context of this dark corporate cloak that's coming down and that he's feeling oppressed by and he's sort of digging in and sort of, it's like his last stand in a way against the man and against the institution that we don't really know what it is, but there's something that he's decided that he can't live with it.
Yeah. And it's, I really do think it's probably Hackman's best performance. I mean, it's that or Night Moves.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Yeah.
There's so much in there, and I think it was Eastwood who said that Hackman's unique gift is that he never seems to be doing anything at all. He's just occupying that character space. And the reason he cast him in Unforgiven is because he wanted people to like this monster.
Right.
And he said that Hackman would be the thing that kept you from running away and never fully declaring anybody a good guy or a bad guy. Because, well, he's Gene Hackman, he can't be a monster. And in this, it's so clear that he is deeply disturbed. There is something fundamentally wrong with Harry Cole, but Hackman makes you lean forward. I wanted to understand it rather than be repulsed by it. Like, whatever's wrong with him is interesting.
Well, apparently that he was quite uncomfortable with the preparation of the plot because Coppola was trying to really make him schlubby and he made him wear the raincoat and he made him shave his hair back.
Yes, because he's an early middle-aged man, even though Hackman himself wasn't that age.
Exactly, and he just tried to, I think he really turned him into a kind of a cipher, he wanted him to sort of blend into the almost fall away from the screen. And apparently, too, he did in the material, he felt the script, like he had just come off like French Connection or things where he got to be even though he's doing dark things, a likable robe.
Oh no, he was the hero. He was a man of action.
Exactly. And whereas in this, it was the action is more internal, and even though there is a clear manner of operation, like the preoccupation with playing with the recording devices and things that Coppola clearly wants to show you that this guy is a master of that medium. He also just shows there's this kind of pain or this existential, spiritual quandary that this guy is sort of trying to navigate this world where he's been completely detached and where he's been just this kind of corporate business, basically a businessman. He's treated what he's doing as a business, and reflected in when you go to that great convention, and he gets punked by the surveillance pen, and just how pissed, like he's just so,
and he's profoundly offended.
And then he's the woman's he's set up with getting his tapes stolen, and but when he goes to the Terry Garr, the first relationship where he has a relationship with a woman, you see how stunted and how his problems with intimacy and communication, and but the real story seems to revolve mostly around the Union Square, where it's just this whole playing out of the brilliance of the repetition of those, the Red Red Robin, Bop Bop and the Long kind of song, with the chaos. The mime is clearly, there's the characters are walking in a circle, and which apparently they thought was hard to surveil. And and then you realize the mime is probably following him, and the mime, and you realize the complexity of the narrative is sort of just decanted from, it's brilliantly unpacked from that as a structural device, using Union Square as a central place. And not only do you get that, it also resonates with the guy holding the shotgun, the mic that's an invention of that for sound. It feels a little bit like the Kennedy assassination, and the grassy knoll, and who's watching who, and the idea of conspiracy and that kind of stuff, that kind of paranoia and then it becomes really personal in that he starts to carry the guilt when he starts to feel he believes to be true what is about to happen, and then it happens, and doesn't happen the way it quite happens. He feels like he was somehow responsible for it. He felt like he had overheard something through his clandestine eavesdropping. He feels like it's almost Shakespearean, like he found this piece of information that he knew, and somehow he couldn't save the damsel, and that somehow he was somehow responsible for that.
That is also a great unconscious anticipation of Watergate, I suppose, because he's Deep Throat. If Deep Throat told the wrong people,
exactly.
If the trust is placed in the wrong reporter, this is where you would have ended up. With everybody being allowed to, like, corruption wins, essentially. I was trying to come up with a better moral term, but no, corruption wins. That's what this is about.
And he gets that phone call near the end where it's like, stay out of it, Harry. It's basically like being like, don't worry, Jake, it's Chinatown kind of.
Exactly.
Jake, it's Chinatown. It's the same kind of, you can't do anything about it. This is bigger than you, and you just forget just forget about it,
And the closest we're
watching you.
and we're watching him too, because the closest we ever get to the actual events is through the distance, through the veil of whatever Call sees or hears or is watching. We don't actually see the murder. We see shadows and a reflection through a curtain or through a glass wall, which is such a stunning image. And
resonates with Psycho too. The shower scene where the blood comes out of the toilet.
It's a remarkable appropriation of a whole bunch of different cinema history and distilled into something that feels completely new.
Absolutely.
Which is a phrase I've been throwing around a lot this week somehow. But
also, I think there's a romanticism of the European cinema, of the biography and the personal storytelling. And I think that was something, apparently he felt that it was hard to humanize the Harry Kull character. And in fact, apparently with early screenings, people weren't identifying with him. They hated him. And so he started to try to humanize him, and he started to build in the dream and the idea too of this idea that his story of growing up with polio and some guilt he had with his mother, and he started to Coppola. It was, I think, a very much of a 70s style of art cinema to bring in personal biography into the character. And so, Scorsese did it with Taxi Driver, where he's in the back of the seat and he's talking, like he's in the cab. Or, Hitchcock did his own version of that kind of thing. But the feeling, the imprint of the filmmaker is really imbued with the Coppola mythology and the mirror of that you are sort of your film in a way, that believing in that kind of romanticism of storytelling and cinema and the auteur and that kind of thing. So I feel I identify with that kind of romanticism.
Yeah. It's also weirdly, I've never been able to accept Harry as a Coppola analog. I accept the argument, but he doesn't enjoy things. And Coppola, food and people
Wine
and conversation. He's so involved in the world. And it comes out in his films that in this one where he tries to do something that's aesthetic, for lack of a better term, it works.
Yeah.
It works really well, but I also feel that it's part of that is a judgment of Harry too.
Yeah.
That he doesn't want him to be the hero somehow, or he knows he won't be.
Well, I think that's the thing too, is that it's a film, and this is what I like about the film as well. I think film today's, they lack allegory, they lack the kind of the story behind the story.
Yeah.
And what I like about those 70s films and his is like, it's not like, say, the Parallax View, where it's about a political thriller. It's about a guy, like one guy that's lost in the, like, it's almost Kafkaesque in the corporate haze. And so there's something about that makes him more like experimental, and it's kind of, it doesn't fit the formula of the genre, and yet it does play off. It does hit the beats of a noir, like we said earlier, but there's something that Coppola's he's using it as a conceptual idea.
Yeah.
It's not simply, and that you have to believe, like, you don't know who the corporate guys are. It's not a documentary. You're not told a lot of information. A lot of information is withheld. And I feel that is in keeping with the kind of the noir, the psychological portrait, the mood, the atmosphere of it, the feeling of it, and the conceptual. There's a story behind the story for Coppola that he's creating a portrait of the times, and it's not just Harry Caul. It's not just, he's emblematic of, he sees him as an allegory for the time. I think, and that I love that ambition, and I think that's really missing in a lot of cinema now.
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, he's sort of if Coppola sees Harry as sort of a mercenary in this world, because he doesn't, his whole selling point is that he has no loyalty, he'll just do the job.
Yeah.
Then what does that say about the nature of morality and where America was going at that point? You have this whole blurry sense that the world is falling apart, but as far as everybody else, these people are successful businessmen and they're all doing really well, and there's a young couple in love. If you look at people, they look like avatars of a successful America. Exactly. But the second they open their mouths, you just realize how broken everything is. I think, I keep coming back to Harrison Ford's character, who now is like Jared Kushner. He's every young, unqualified white guy who has this position of, he's a secretary.
Yeah.
He's a doorman.
And in a strange way, he's a bit like the guy in Apocalypse Now. The same kind of guy.
The same function.
He's like the errand boy kind of, telling on behalf of the big corporation.
Exactly.
The front. He's the guy, when you go to any corporation, who glad hands you, but, blows you off as soon as he realizes that he can't get anything from you from a power perspective. And
he's there to deliver your instructions.
Yeah.
There's no interest in anything else.
Yeah.
And his role in the conversation is so, it's really only interesting now because that's future superstar Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can see why he's future superstar Harrison Ford. He's given that some consideration. He's really thought through what specific kind of an asshole he would be.
Yeah, and it's as much as what he doesn't say as what he says.
He delights in withholding.
Yeah, there's an imposing kind of quality about him, and a kind of menace. Mm-hmm. And that don't think that if my boss tells me that I wouldn't do something really bad to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like he's got that feeling,
Yeah.
like he's almost like out of a Conrad novel, you know, like
he's waiting for the opportunity to do something.
Carpetbagger kind of guy. Like he'll do anything that the boss needs to have done on his behalf to make the things for the corporation right.
Yeah.
You know, and at the same time, he does, you know, he's clean cut. He doesn't look, you know, like a mobster.
Yeah, no, he's the face of American success.
Yeah.
He's a corporate shark in the waiting.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if his character in Working Girl isn't supposed to be the same guy.
Exactly.
Although I also comfort myself with knowing that because Duvall got whacked on his watch, he probably got whacked too.
Right.
So that's fine.
Yeah.
But
it is a nice twist too, with the end with Duvall's character being the victim.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that the corporate, they did a preemptive strike on him, and it wasn't the poor young couple that were going to get whacked. It was,
and it wasn't about business. There's no corporate interest whatsoever. It's purely about and placing
self-interest.
Yeah.
And just like Tony Soprano represents kind of corporate America of that time, like every guy would fantasize, like if I could really be potent, I would really like to whack that guy and get him out of my way, but because I work for a corporation, I can't do that. But in this case, Harry is this guy that's just kind of, they just expect him, like, don't you get it, man? Just keep your mouth shut. We'll pay you your 15 grand. It's pretty good money.
Yeah.
Move on. You didn't see anything. The corporate, you know, like, you get that feeling, and then there's something where something just physically becomes immovable in his, something wakes up in him. And I think if I was thinking of some of the trigger, it's partly his his you know, his sense of duty and guilt, and from his mother in the dream, and that I think he really falls, like he becomes there's a sexual charge with the girl in this picture. He fixates on her and obsesses, and that somehow becomes not rational anymore. He becomes like a knight and has to becomes like an errant knight, and he has to do something to save the damsel in distress, and then realizes that the forces are much bigger and darker than he ever imagined, but that he has his own delusions that come out of all the things that we talked about that are not really, they're implied, but you have to draw your own conclusions as to what, if he's slightly off the spectrum, what his issues are.
Yeah. All I know is never get between a Catholic and a moral certainty.
Exactly.
And of course, he's wrong.
Yeah.
Like, that's the other thing too, is that you've gone through this.
He's blinded. But,
and we know it before he does, which is fine.
Yeah.
Because there's something truly shocking about that, because Coppola plays with, and he was doing it in The Godfather too. You know, these are horrible people.
Yeah.
But they're nice to their family.
Yeah.
And so you're corrupted by watching it. By wanting to empathize.
You see your own humanness, how compelling certain things are if you were in those circumstances of power and what's at stake.
And we're given all of the clues that not only is Harry Cole not a great person, but that he's making mistakes. We get to see it, and we still want him to be right because he's Gene Hackman, and you know, he's got that clarity of purpose, and everything about the performance pulls you into wanting him to be right, because wouldn't that be great? And it's the same thing with Chinatown. It's the same thing with, The Long Goodbye is
the moral ambiguity.
Yeah, a different kind of disappointment in that case, because it ends with Marlowe acting against all moral codes, but he's still being correct. And in this one, he just fails so completely to do anything, although he did do the job he was contracted for, which I'm sure in a year's time will give him.
And at a certain point, he even it wasn't even about the money anymore. He actually went back and gave it. It didn't. He wasn't prepared to take it.
Yeah, he tried to buy his way back out.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, of course, as Catholic as it gets.
I love the guy who's the other kind of a bit of a weasel master, but the other rock star bugger from New York. Yeah, from New York. And I like the fact because he kind of undresses Harry in the sense. Also, he alludes to that there's some darkness left, some business that was back in New York and Chicago that was kind of sketchy, and how the hell did he not go down, for that? And, I can see why you're down here in sunny LA, because basically it's implying that he's left something behind that maybe is a little bit unsavory, a little bit like, and that he hasn't morally. The consequences are the chickens are starting to come home to roost in his psyche and starting to manifest in his perception of this story and how it affects him on an emotional, psychic level.
Yeah, you know? That other great noir trope: you get out, but you don't get away.
Exactly.
And
it's hard to come clean in a dirty world. I forget which line it's from a movie, but it's one of those noirs.
It's every movie. There is something, and there is something great about the contrast between Hackman and Garfield, because he is just so loud and obnoxious, but he's also, as it turns out, better at his job than Call is.
Right.
And so you're on Call's side at first. Like, Harry doesn't like him, so I don't like him. But actually, he's
a showman. He's like a sideshow talker, you know.
And for the early 70s, again, that's where America was going.
Yeah, P.T. Barnum-ish.
They like Flash. He's got the cooler toys.
Yeah,
and
his guy's even prepared to lead, like, because
kids of hell.
Harry doesn't have much of a sense of humor, and the other guy just has enough with him. Wants to join the sexier team with the babes on the arm, and, you know, go out and party.
Yeah, who wouldn't?
Yeah,
he probably pays better.
Yeah, exactly.
And all Harry has is this moral clarity that isn't clear at all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
God, it's a great. You could go into it for days and days and days. It was just such a magnificent.
The sound work on it is revelatory. Like, it's for its time. I think it's so. I love the expressionistic nature of it and the polyrhythmic, and it really kind of mirrors the editing and the actual unraveling of the image and that one line, you know, about he would murder us if he had the chance, right? That there's slight variations on that they recorded that are pretty well saying the same thing, but just incrementally said enough to create that doubt or trigger different, you know, ways of thinking about it. But the picture is sort of the same basic picture, right? And I think the sound, to come up with this sort of expressionistic way of making that the way into it is so, it's really structurally interesting how the sound plays in counterpart to the more jazz, like, you know, noirish, melancholic, you know, Harry's kind of, you know, on, you know, it's like a bit Taxi Driver, like that kind of noirish sound where he's driving and, you know, into the night, you know, in the darkness.
Yeah, all the tropes are there, but they're functioning against their purposes.
Exactly.
And it's so unique for Coppola's filmography. It almost feels like, I mean, of course it does, because De Palma ended up doing it in Blowout, but it almost feels like a De Palma film from that period. It's just this weird anomaly in both of their filmographies that Coppola made this one and De Palma didn't.
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone else could have either, because the timing, the world of the film, the fact that he had access to this stuff,
the pressure's coming off doing Godfather, which was a gargantuan success.
But no one knew at the time.
Yeah,
it was
and
a
the
huge
power.
risk.
Yeah, and I think he had started writing this, and even maybe before. So it was probably like a labor of love story. It probably was really lining up with the times, and he probably sensed that, like, wanted to express that. And I think he's an artist and wanted to do something that was more like he was watching a lot of European art. Like, he was a fan of Bertolucci, and he wanted to make that kind of feeling, emotional, kind of personal exploration, whereas the mechanics of doing the bigger Hollywood funded kind of projects, as much as they had his imprint on, I think this was he was doing, it was almost like it's more improvised than the other work, and more of a conceptual experimental thriller than it is, you know, following a genre per se, you know what I mean? And I think he was attracted to being able to have that artistic freedom and to express himself in a different, more intimate kind of scale, where it was smaller crew. It's almost shot like a documentary, you know, like it
feels very run and gun, even though it couldn't have been because of crowd control and everything else that would be going on.
Exactly, yeah.
It's deceptively light and small.
Yeah.
But
and I think they did probably take some advantage of actual putting them in with real people. Like, there was the use of the San Francisco feels, I mean, the corporate head office feels like more controlled, but when you're in Union Square, there is a kind of a documentary kind of aspect to it.
a general bustle. That it feels real even if it's staged. So it just, and because that's how it opens, you're immediately thrown into a sense of reality that clearly is being tweaked and twisted throughout, and that's the whole point, right?
At first you think you're going, oh yeah, okay, you associate, by now we all associate those long lenses with surveillance, but he quickly dispenses with that, and it becomes really, you're just watching Harry Call and his manner of operation. And as you said earlier, everything you know is only what he's either looking at or what his manner of operation that the camera is observing. So it's never breaks from that continuity. And the only time is the dream sequence, which is still in the familiar. It's still in the Union Square. I think, it's somewhere in.
It's an ersatz realization of it, but it's close enough.
And then so outside of that, you're always and the fragments of the murder that you see, the glass, like you said, and that is kind of like is in his head, but everything else feels you're with him and it's his perspective, even though you're the psychology of it, because of the sound and the disorienting sound in the beginning, you feel like there's more angles, more things going on, but it's really illusory. It's not actually happening, because it's really quite pared back and spare, and then the camera moves,
it's a beautiful rigid construction. It just convinces you to think that it's something else, which is of course the whole aesthetic of the film and the story. So I forgot to ask at the beginning, what was your first experience? When did you first see it?
I saw it in the movie theaters, like in Toronto.
In its original release?
Yeah, I saw it in film. And I just remember I equated it with European art cinema. I thought having her, like, I'd seen his earlier work, but I pictured him doing a bigger kind of more controlled cinema.
Yeah.
And so I was really startled by the kind of the free filmmaking that I associated with European art cinema. But there is the draw on the history of the old, the 50s, 40s noir, or the detective, crime story.
Yeah.
So murder mystery. So those two, I was a fan of both those forms. So it really struck me as something quite powerful, even though I was quite young, like a young guy. But
I didn't catch up to it until the 80s. I would have loved to have seen it the first time through. But I was too young. And then this brings us more or less, although you did sort of touch on it at the very beginning, this brings us to the closer question of the podcast, which is, like, what of the conversation have you absorbed? I mean, so many of your films are documentaries. Did you ever find a way to use it as an influence, or?
Well, I think in the sense of, the way it's put together, I feel intrinsically is how my wife is the editor of my films, Caroline Christie, and sound and picture and the kind of structural expressionistic editing that is employed in that film, I think is the kind of way I approach material. So even in my documentary work, I feel that kind of editing and using sound expressionistically, and sometimes polyrhythmically repeating certain images in montage and things, I could say I feel like that film would have made a big influence on me. And I also think with my recent film Birdland, it really I wanted to completely blur the lines between what is surveilled and what is the internal aspect of the character. And because we moved from, as you say, the analog world of that time, the reel-to-reel, the old bugs, the things where you could see the mechanics of everything was visible. Now everything is hidden, and digitally everything is... surveillance affects us in ways. When you put a camera on someone, it changes the way they behave.
Right.
When you live in a society that is completely surveilled, it changes the way we all behave. So I was interested in the comparisons because I think it is ultimately the kind of film that's asking what is real, and what is imagined as in Harry Call's world is as real as what is and what we all perceive to be seeing and hearing is making us ask that question, what is real? So I think I take a lot from that film stylistically because of I like the fractured narrative, the storytelling, and very much that my film too, the Birdland, for instance, draws on those kind of French New Wave kind of films that are drawing on American cinema, and also I'm drawing on early B-movie detective noir. So I kind of really feel in sync with that film, even though that was a low budget by Coppola standards, for me it's probably still coffee money for that film, but still I really draw a lot. I drew a lot from that film in terms of its use of surveillance, its use of perception, guilt, the kind of the pull of sex and death, and how, and ultimately its pure ambition of wanting to be a portrait of the times, and that creating the mood of that is as much a noir. The world that the noir creates is as much narrative, as it gives as much meaning to the film as the narrative.
Mm-hmm. And the difference, I suppose, the difference between The Conversation and any film made now is as you say, the awareness of surveillance is already, we've internalized it. We know there is no such thing as genuine privacy.
Yeah.
And so The Conversation 45 years later feels, sort of adorably dated in that it's about one man trying to preserve himself, but it's also everything, right? Like it's not just a metaphor; it's simply a mission statement.
Exactly. What also is really quite brilliant is that its title, The Conversation, it's a couple in this park who just say a couple of lines, and yet it's a whole feature film that's mostly visual. It is about sound, and it is sonically revelatory, but it's really about the mise en scene. It's really like what is unfolding is very visual, and it's really pure cinema. Like, it's very expressive cinema.
Yeah. You can see Coppola daring himself into it, really.
Exactly.
My whole movie is going to be about an exchange.
Yeah.
And not.
Yeah.
And somehow he ended up making one of the defining American films of the 70s in a decade where everything is a defining American. Like, it's just full of great stuff.
Yeah.
But I think
it captures the delirium and the paranoia of the times, and kind of this, how probably the corporate man and what that means in at that moment in time. For him, what that corporate cipher and the, like you say, the Harrison Ford character that represents the guy at the front, the PR guy almost at the front man, and there's just so many layers to it. And the technology, I also just love the romanticization of technology, of where it was at that time. It was like still the idea of the future is still on the horizon. Growing up as a kid, it was like that kind of, everything was like either the Flintstones or the Jetsons. Like, it was either bedrock or somehow the future was always this place somewhere on the horizon. And even there's something almost slightly sci-fi about the corporation, that the headquarters,
very much so. I mean, it's just a small
Alphaville
deviation.
Almost. It's like Alf Godard's Alphaville,
or a Bond film.
Yeah,
right?
a Bond.
It's just a little bit further away.
Yeah,
but somehow it's ground level normal, and everything is worse for it.
Yeah,
way to go, America.
No, I was going to say a mirror of the times. Like, it really mirrors it.
I kind of wonder what the 2022 movies are going to look like. The stuff that's being started now, rattling around in people's subconsciouses. I don't know that you can make techno thrillers anymore without turning them into a Bourne movie or Bond movie, or something where there's a different recognizable shape.
Yeah, or I wonder if there's almost no point trying to do the tech anymore, and if it will be more this kind of dystopic, almost like shot like Children of Men, where it's like everything is, or like it's kind of like going into the ruins of nature, the end of nature, and the architecture being kind of deconstructed. And it's hard to say because I mean, you've got these kids that are completely obsessed with looking at the small screen. They're watching gamers and watching other gamers punk other gamers, and probably listening to either gangster rap or Skrillex or something, like somewhere in between there.
It's all removed from their own experience.
Exactly. Like culturally, you could be living in Stainer or some small town, and they're as wired into, rap and hip hop as some kid from South Central almost. And so it's, what is that kind of almost like aliens have taken over. It's like a Ray Bradbury story on steroids, like it's how that will manifest. It's hard to say. But the intimate scale of the Coppola film, I think, is a great way of dealing with it. I think because it becomes a human story, and it's not like Parallax View, let's say, was made the same year, or they're like, it's about big forces, the big stage, whereas this is about off, like it's an off camera, it's off the stage. It's just happening, out of the sight of the bigger news cameras. It's like this someone's dirty little life and their compromises and how they start to come home to roost.
It's about the functionaries and their lack of like, if you don't have any real responsibility, if you're just pushing a button or delivering a tape, does that make you part of the machine? Or how long can you pretend to be outside of the machine when you're working for it?
And do you really have as much agent? Like, Harry started to feel like he was maybe getting some agency that was not just making a buck or delivering it as a corporate exchange.
Right.
And all of a sudden, did he really, once he ripped his place apart and probably felt good doing it, and then realized that he gets the call going, no, don't worry, don't bother.
Way to go.
We're watching you.
My thanks to Peter Lynch, whose new thriller Birdland is now available for sale and rental on iTunes and Google Play in Canada, and on iTunes and Amazon Video in the US. You should check it out. Thanks also to Cynthia Amsden. She knows what she did. Peter's not on Twitter, but you can find his movie at Birdland Movie, all one word, and you can find the conversation on DVD from Paramount Home Entertainment and on Blu-ray from Lionsgate Home Entertainment. It's also available on iTunes, but only in the US, only for rental, and only in standard definition. Yuck. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you feel like leaving a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to these things, that would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps, it really does. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.